Richards channel, where you always learn a multitude of key concepts to improve your painting skills.
Okay, hey there. We're talking about paintbrushes. Like, you're starting out, you're trying to figure out what kind of paintbrushes do I get. And let me start by telling you something that I came to understand. It's this. I went around to all these different master painters throughout the United States and learned from various different master painters. And each painter I would go to, I would notice they had all these commonalities with all of these other painters that were equally great painters. Lots of times the color palette would be the same or very similar, and there would be all these similarities. And so anytime I could find all of these things that were the same among all these great painters, I knew that was gold, because I knew if I emulated that, I'd be doing good. When it came to brushes, though, they all used different styles of brushes and different brands of brushes, and each one would tell me, this is what you have to use. This is the brush. But what I was finding out is they were all great painters producing great paintings using different kinds of brushes. So what you need to know is that it's not going to matter what style of brush. Like, if somebody tells you all round brushes, that's what you need to use. Whatever you get used to, that's what's going to work for you as far as style of brush. So hear me clearly. I'm not saying all brushes are equal. I'm saying the style of brush. So if you're using a round, if you're using a filbert end brush, if you're using a square or a bright, those styles of brushes are not so important which style that you get used to. You're going to end up producing really great paintings out of whatever style of brush that you use. But having said that, all brushes are not created equal. The type of brush that an awful lot of people use is either a flat brush, that's a flat brush, right? So it's got a flat head on it, or a bright brush, which is almost exactly the same thing, except for the bristles are shorter. I tend to like brights because I get a lot of control out of a bright brush. The longer the bristles are, the more likely that they're going to kind of sway over to the side as you're painting with them. That is one of the problems with round brushes having a lot of control, because they have a tendency to kind of droop. When you are painting details in a painting, and you go, okay, so I'm going to get one of these very thin little brushes. The ones that are made specifically for doing details tend to be like little 3, 4, 5 hair brushes, and they also have a tendency from the ferrule, this is the ferrule, the metal part, to be kind of long for how big around they are. And so they definitely have a tendency to droop, and when you're trying to pick up paint onto the brush, it has a tendency to sway those long bristles over to the sides, and it groups onto the bristles. And so the very paintbrush that you buy, which these little thin tall paintbrushes tend to be very expensive, they end up with a glob of paint on the end, and then when you go to do your detail work, it does just the opposite. You're leaving a big sway of paint on that brush. So I don't suggest these little thin brushes for doing detail work. Instead, I'm gonna get around to what the best brushes are, slowly but surely. Let's look at this. Instead, what I'm going to suggest to you is that you make something called a modified fan brush. And I have a different video that's all it does is just teach you how to make a modified fan brush. What these are for is where you take a fan brush and you purposely cut it up in a specialized way. So that you can make grasses with it. It's such a great tool for being able to form grasses in your paintings. But every once in a while you have this one little stalk of grass that goes off by itself. It's a very thin little line, you know. And so part of making this modified fan brush is that you keep just a few little hairs sticking out full length, and the rest of the hairs around it you cut back incrementally, smaller and smaller, so that they support that one little group of hairs. And so instead of having just a few hairs that stick up, you have this supporting team that's holding those hairs together, and you can get really good details with that. Before I go on also to what might be some good brushes to get, is I want you to keep in mind that if you've been painting for a while and you have these old, broken down, beat up old brushes, don't throw them away, because just like an old pair of jeans, they get soft and they feel so good. Well, not that important for the brushes to feel so good, but they get all frazzly and softened up. And so whenever you are painting and you paint something that has kind of hard edges on it, it's a little too hard edged, and you want to soften it out. Say you're making clouds, and so you make this nice fluffy cloud, but it looks more like it's made out of marshmallow because it's thick and it's hard edged and everything. And you're like, I want that to be more atmospheric. You can take an old beat up brush and just buff the edges of whatever it is that you're wanting to soften out. So when you're asking yourself, what's the best brush? Really what you need to be asking yourself is what's the best brush for what I'm trying to achieve at the time? And so if I want to soften an edge, I want this beat up old brush to use that for. If you're talking about starting out a painting and you're putting in big blocks of value and color, you're just trying to get some paint or some tone on your whole canvas, one of the best paint brushes you can use is just some Bounty paper towels. Just take like that and dip it in your paint and rub it on. It will cover really quickly. You can also use a household paintbrush for painting walls, you know, maybe a 2.5 inch or 3 inch brush for being able to do something like that. Works really well to get a lot of paint on your canvas quickly. A thing I like about a paper towel also is, and I use Bounty, and now that may sound funny, but I find that it is kind of clothy and kind of papery all at the same time. And so you can squeeze it and get a bunch of little crinkles in it. And when you dip your paint and you apply it, you can create all kinds of different textures on your canvas with a paper towel that you could never do with a brush. I have another video on that, how to paint with a paper towel. You might want to look at that. That'd be great. And then let's talk about brands. So there are a lot of brands of brushes. I can't possibly tell you all of the multitude of brands that are really quite good brushes, but I can tell you a few that I think are maybe some good ideas to have in your group of brushes. So let's break them down into two types of brushes as far as the bristles. So there are natural bristle brushes, and then there are synthetic bristle brushes. And the natural bristles, like this hog's hair bristle brush, it has a stiffness to the bristles that will allow you to create different kinds of textures than a synthetic brush. For instance, with this rough texture, I can drag this down on my canvas and create the sense of wood grain on an old beat up barn. With a soft synthetic brush, I can get the softness and the feel of some clouds or some mist coming off of a waterfall. So it's important to maybe have bristles, natural bristles, and synthetics in your group of brushes as well. So what's a good synthetic brush? I really like, now, Robert Simmons. You can't go wrong with Robert Simmons brushes. And this sapphire, they're these blue-handled ones, sapphire brushes, the synthetics, are just primo. I just really love these. I also like to have the long version of these. I feel that it gives you a balance as you're painting that shorter brushes do not. So Robert Simmons Sapphire for the synthetics, Robert Simmons Signet for the hog's hair bristles. Excellent, excellent brushes. If you're getting brushes online or you're getting brushes from a larger paint supply house in your area, you can get those. But if you don't have those around, a lot of places don't have those. Local stores, Hobby Lobby has something that's called a Master's Touch brush, and I find these Master's Touch brushes to be really quite good value because they're not very expensive, but they're a nice brush. Another brush that is really a pretty quality brush that you'll find at a lot of local supply places is a Princeton brush. And so I just want y'all to know that I'm not getting any money or sponsorships from any of these brands. I'm just telling you what I use and what I think is really good for you. Another brush that you absolutely should have in your repertoire is a palette knife, which isn't a brush at all. But again, as we're talking about like paper towels and things like that, it's what are you painting with? So absolutely have a palette knife. Palette knives are great. You can check out my video on how to use a palette knife. But palette knives, you can make little thin lines and place them on your canvas. They are great for that. But more importantly is when you're mixing your paint, always use a palette knife, because you can mix your paint and wipe it clean, and now you're ready to mix something else. Whereas with any kind of brush, when you go to mix your paints, if you leave just a little bit of residue in the bristles, you'll end up with a color that you were not planning on as you're mixing. So that can be a real problem as well. So that's it. Let's, we can get all of these paint brushes. I tend to end up using just really one paintbrush lots of times for about 90–95% of my painting. Tends to be a larger size brush. But if you get a really nice brush, I want you to look at this brush, and I'm going to turn it to the side. Look how razor sharp that brush is. If you get a really nice high quality brush, the bristles will not splay out wide like this beat up old brush that I would use for softening edges. And because it is so sharp, you can do detail work with the corner point of that. So it's another reason I like flats and brights, is because you have a lot of control with that kind of thing. So last thing that I'm going to say is with your brushes, if you can't get your brushes clean good, then you may not do well with the brushes you have. So I always suggest to have a solvent bucket. These are really great as brush cleaners. So it comes with a little handy basket that you can use this metal piece across here to kind of rub your brush against to help clean it off. And it sits down in the solvent so that because there is holes in the bottom of it, it allows the solvent and the residue to pass through and go down to the bottom of the bucket so that you're always using clean solvent all the time. So that's a really great thing to have, because you can have the nicest brush in the world, but if it's got all kinds of built up paint in the bristles, it's not going to do much for you. So I hope that was helpful to you, and get out there and paint. Okay. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed that video, and I hope you're getting a lot of value out of all of these videos that we're posting on the artist Craig Richards channel. You know, there's all kinds of how-tos, there's the weekly paint class, and there's occasional outings like going out in plein air somewhere. We're going to be going down the Yadkin River in the spring, going to museums, things like that. I think you'd enjoy those. If you're getting value out of these, then like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. You have to subscribe in order to be able to hit the notification bell, and that's for you. The reason I'm saying that is so that you know when the next paint class is coming out, so that if you're working on a painting and we're doing it again the next week, that you can follow along with us. And leave us comments, you know, not just for me, but for the students as well. Say, you know, Deb, you did a great painting, Kitty, you did a great painting, or Craig, you did a great demonstration this week. That builds us up, and we want to build you up as well. We want to help you to keep painting and keep growing. You're doing great. Don't tell yourself you're not. You are doing wonderful. Just keep at it, and you'll learn and grow each week with us. So, happy painting.